Hello everyone, and welcome back once again to another video in which we'll be talking about the chapter Nelson Mandela, A Long Walk to Freedom. So let's start. First, let's get to know Mr. Nelson Mandela. Mr. Nelson Mandela's childhood name was Holy Shlashla Mandela. The spelling starts with the letter R, but its pronunciation isn't Roli Hala Hala, as you might think it is. I, with my North Indian accent, cannot pronounce Holy Shlashla properly. It's an entirely South African way of pronouncing certain words and sounds. A British teacher in Mandela's school had the same problem, and it was she who gave him the name Nelson. Hence, we know him as Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was the first black president of South Africa. He was an anti-apartheid revolutionary, a political leader, and a philanthropist. Philanthropist means a person who seeks to promote the welfare of others, especially by the generous donation of money to good causes. Nelson Mandela was born to the Thembu royal family in Mvezo, Union of South Africa. This here is a map of Mvezo, you can see towards the bottom of South Africa. This is a photo of Mandela's childhood village. Mandela used to live in this village in his childhood. Nelson Mandela studied law and began working as a lawyer in Johannesburg. In this image, you can see Mr. Nelson Mandela standing on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side is Mr. Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela's partner. This here is the building from which Mr. Nelson Mandela and Mr. Oliver Tambo operated. Mr. Nelson Mandela became involved in anti-colonial and African nationalist politics. He joined the ANC, that is African National Congress, in 1943. He also co-founded its Youth League in 1944. After the National Party's white-only government established apartheid, Mandela and the ANC committed themselves to overthrow it. So the National Party of South Africa started or adopted a policy of apartheid. The entire National Party was a white-only government, which means the government, all the people of the government, all the leaders were white. Blacks were not given any recognition or any exposure in the entire government. And so, Nelson Mandela and all the other members of African National Congress committed themselves to overthrow it. Later on, Nelson Mandela was charged with treason and sentenced to life imprisonment in 1962, after which he spent 27 years in jail. This is the room in Robben Island where Nelson Mandela was kept or imprisoned for several years. This here is another image from Nelson Mandela's jail term. You can see the other jailmates working in the background and Nelson Mandela engaged in a talk with someone else. Mandela was finally released in 1991, 27 years later, after widespread protests from people all over the world. He contested the first fully representative democratic elections in South Africa in 1994. And then he became the country's first black head of the state. Over the course of his life, Mandela was given over 250 awards, including the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1990, India also awarded him the Bharat Ratna. Let's have an introduction to the chapter. The chapter is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. This extract contains a description of the inauguration ceremony, citations from his speech, his journey to being a freedom fighter, his struggle, and a tribute to other freedom fighters and countless other people who fought for their freedom. Before starting the chapter, let's discuss some important events. The Anglo-Boer War, which started in 1899 and continued up to 1902. This war was fought between the British Empire and two independent Boer states, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State. This war was fought over the British Empire's influence in South Africa. The trigger to the war was the discovering of diamonds and gold in the Boer states. Now, who are the Boers? Originally, the meaning of the word Boer is a farmer. But in South Africa, Boers are the descendants of the Dutch settlers who settled in South Africa in the 17th century. When gold and diamond was discovered, South Africa was being governed by the British. The British used the Boers as cheap labor to extract and export these precious metal and gems to England. The Boers were against this. According to them, the gold and diamond belonged to them. Hence, the war. Initially, these Boer attacks were successful because the British weren't prepared. British military force later managed to reverse this. British reinforcements, they reversed this. They started defeating the Boer groups. But the war continued for years with Boer guerrilla warfare until harsh British countermeasures brought the Boers to terms and finally the war ended. It was after this war that the relations between the whites and the other native races turned sour. It prepared the grounds for the establishment of the brutal system of apartheid. That brings me to the topic of apartheid. Apartheid means segregation or apartheid. It was a system of racial segregation. Segregation means separation that existed in South Africa from 1948 until the early 1990s. The system of apartheid ensured that South Africa was dominated politically, socially, and economically by the nation's white people only. According to this system of social stratification, white citizens had the highest status, followed in descending order by the Asians, then the coloreds, and then came the black Africans. So the black Africans were at the bottom of this social strata. Apartheid saw the segregation even of the public facilities and social events, and the distribution of housing and employment opportunities by race as well. Here are a few images to show you the intensity of the situation. You can clearly see the board over here, which asks people to beware of natives, to be cautious of the natives. Now, how degrading is that? This is a staircase. There are two different parts of the staircase. One side is for non-Europeans only, and the other is for the whites, means only the Europeans. The staircase on the right hand side is to be used only by the white people. The others would be using the staircase on the left. In this image, you can clearly see that all the white people are sitting in the front part of the bus, and the blacks and the coloreds and the Asians have been made to sit towards the back side of the bus. Here's another image. You can see that the front side of the bus is partially empty, yet The blacks are not allowed to sit. The blacks and the coloreds and the Asians are allowed to sit or stand at the back. Even when there are no seats at the back, they are not allowed to come forward and sit in any of the seats specially allocated for the whites. This is another iconic image which tells that this premises is only and only to be used exclusively by white people. No colored or Asian or black person can enter the premises. This is a very iconic image which clearly shows the social stratification in South Africa those days. The right hand side, there's a sink which is to be used by the colored people, the white, the blacks or the Asians. You can see the condition of the basin. You can see the condition of the water faucet. And on the left hand side is a perfectly well maintained, well cleaned, beautiful looking water faucet that is to be used only by the whites. Now let's start talking about the chapter. The chapter begins with Nelson Mandela introducing the day when the inauguration is to take place. He tells us that it was 10th of May and the day was bright and clear. It dawned bright and clear. Dawned means started. The day started very bright and clear. It was a beautiful day. He told us that dignitaries and world leaders had been coming for the past few days to pay their respects to Nelson Mandela before the inauguration, which would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on South African soil. So what is inauguration? It is the formal declaration and beginning of democracy in South Africa in the year 1994. So this day is 10th May 1994. The ceremonies take place in the sandstone amphitheatre formed by the Union buildings in Pretoria. This is an amphitheatre. An amphitheatre is usually a circular building which has no roof, and it has rows and rows of seats that rise in steps around an open space. This is the amphitheatre of Union buildings. Basically, this is the Union building, and the space that you can see in the middle is the amphitheatre. Let's take a closer look. You can see the steps where people are supposed to sit. Let's take an even closer look. This is the day of the inauguration ceremony. You can see the arrangement of the chairs on the steps and the arrangement for the people to sit. It was 10th of May, but Mandela tells us that it was a lovely autumn day. The reason of 10th May being autumn is that South Africa lies in the southern hemisphere, and because of it being in the southern hemisphere, the seasons are completely the opposite of what we experience in the northern hemisphere. Hence, when we have summer, the people in the southern hemisphere or the countries in the southern hemisphere experience winter or autumn. So it was an autumn day. And Mandela remembers being accompanied by his daughter Zinani on the podium. This here is an image where you can see Nelson Mandela singing the national anthem with his daughter by his side. On this day, Mr. F.W. de Klerk was sworn in as the second Deputy President, and Mr. Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as the first Deputy President. Mr. F.W. de Klerk is on the left-hand side and Mr. Thabo Mbeki is on the right-hand side here in these two images. Let's talk about the speech that Nelson Mandela had given that day. Nelson Mandela had started by saying that the presence of all the guests on the day of the inauguration has conferred glory and hope to newborn liberty. He is actually talking about democracy which is being established from that day onwards. And this democracy is the newborn liberty he is talking about. He also says that African soil has witnessed an extraordinary human disaster. He's actually referring to apartheid. And he says that this disaster has lasted for too long, almost a century. Having overthrown the racial government and its policy of apartheid, South Africa should create a society that must set an example for the whole world, the entire humanity to be proud of. An ideal society where racial discrimination does not exist. Mandela says that South Africa was an outlawed country until a few years ago because of its brutal policy of apartheid. As we all know that almost all the countries of the nation had broken its ties with South Africa because of its policy of apartheid. But today, it has got the rare privilege to host so many different countries and their leaders on its soil. Mandela refers to the presence of all the world leaders here during the inauguration ceremony. Mr. Mandela thanks all the distinguished international guests and the people of the country for having come for the inauguration, and he calls it a common victory of justice, peace and human dignity. In his speech, Mr. Mandela pledges to eradicate poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender and any other form of discrimination. He says that no one will be oppressed in this country ever again. He says that the sun will never set on this glorious human achievement. What is this glorious human achievement he is mentioning? He is talking about the abolition of apartheid and establishment of democracy. According to him, this establishment of democracy and abolition of apartheid is a huge human achievement. It's a huge achievement not only for South Africa but for the whole humanity. The meaning of this idiom, the sun will never set, means something would never come to an end. So this apartheid would never come back. Democracy would never come to an end. After the swearing-in ceremony, Mr. Mandela and his guests looked towards the sky to see the South African jets, helicopters and troop carriers fly in perfect formation over the Union buildings to demonstrate the military's loyalty to the newly elected democratic government. A chevron of Impala jets gave out smoke in the colors of the South African flag. Chevron means a V formation. This is a very common type of formation displayed during military parades or important national occasions. So this chevron of Impala jets gave out smoke in the colors of the South African flag. These are Impala jets. And this is the South African flag. You can see the colors red, white, green, blue, black and gold. So these are the colors of smoke that these Impala jets emitted while flying in a chevron. After this, the highest generals of South African Defence Force and Police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from the days gone by. Bedecked means decorated and days gone by means past years. So the chests, the uniforms of these policemen or the defense personnel, they were decorated with ribbons and medals from the past years. They came and saluted Mr. Mandela and they pledged their allegiance to him. Allegiance means loyalty. These were the same people who would have arrested Mr. Mandela a few years ago. Because few years ago, it was a white-only government, and during that government, Mr. Mandela was a criminal. And hence, these same people who had served the white government back then would have arrested Mr. Mandela, but now, since Mr. Mandela has become the president, so they are pledging their loyalty to him. This here is a photo of a South African general. You can see his chest decorated with medals and ribbons. These medals and ribbons are a testimony of his bravery that he must have shown during wars or different situations in the country. In order to show unity as a display of the unity between races, two national anthems were sung that day. The whites sang the new national anthem of Africa, Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika, and the blacks sang the old anthem, Die Stem, which was sung during the white-only racial government. And this was done only in order to show the unity that's going to prevail in Africa now onwards. That day, during the inauguration, neither the whites nor the blacks knew the words or the lyrics of the national anthem properly, but they would know in days and months and years to come. Let's talk a little about Nelson Mandela's thoughts about history. He's trying to tell us that after the Anglo-Boer War was over in 1902. In the first decade of the 20th century, that is in the 1910s, so the first decade. And this was a few years before Mr. Mandela was born. Mr. Mandela was born on 1918, and we here are talking about the first decade of 20th century. So during this decade, the white-skinned people of South Africa came together and they created one of the harshest, most inhumane societies ever by erecting a system of racial domination against the black-skinned people of their own country. So there was a system of racial domination. The white-skinned people would dominate and the colored or the blacks would be dominated. The system, Apartheid, has finally been overthrown in the last decade of the century, that is in the 1994, when the first democratic elections in South Africa has been held and the establishment of the first democratic government. So it took an entire century to get rid of this brutal system of apartheid. While remembering the sacrifices, Nelson Mandela remembers the sacrifice made by thousands of people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. He calls himself the sum of all those sacrifices African patriots had made before him. Sum of all those sacrifices means he thinks that he is the result of all those people's sacrifices who have sacrificed their lives before him. He, Nelson Mandela, has become the first black president of South Africa. Democracy has been established. All this is the sum total. It's the culmination of all the sacrifices that were made. So he feels that it is because of all those sacrifices, it is a result of all those sacrifices that finally we are witnessing this day. Finally, it's 10th May, the Inauguration Ceremony. Democracy is being established. The racial government has been overthrown. And the first South Africa is witnessing its first black head of the state, first black South African president. So he believes that it is the result of all those sacrifices. He tells us that that noble line has ended and has begun again with him. That noble line means all those noble people who sacrificed themselves. Now, no more sacrifices are needed. People don't need to sacrifice themselves anymore. That sacrificial line has ended. And now another type of line would start with Nelson Mandela. A line, a series of able leaders who are worthy of respect, who would come and take the nation to newer heights. Mr. Mandela is pained for not being able to thank them as they aren't alive anymore. Mr. Mandela feels pained that they can't see the result of their sacrifices. While talking about the great leaders, Mr. Mandela says that apartheid had created a deep and lasting wound in the country, and it would take years, probably decades, to recover from the profound hurt. He says that these decades of oppression, the natives of South Africa had suffered oppression in the hands of their own country's white people for decades. And this decades of oppression had also created some great leaders, although unintentionally. It was not the intention of the white people to create some good leaders. It was not their intention to have good leaders among the natives, but unintentionally some great leaders came out of this oppression. Mr. Mandela talks about men like Walter Sisulu, Mr. Oliver Tambo, Mr. Robert Sobukwe, Chief Luthuli, Yusuf Daddo, Bram Fisher, and other people, and calls them men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their like may never be known again. Their like means people like them may never be born again or never be known again. If you notice, in the chapter, these names have been mentioned in plural. Mr. Mandela mentions these names in plural. You can see in the extract on the screen. He wants to say that not only these illustrious leaders, but there are also many other people like them whose names aren't known, but they contributed to the cause with the same amount of courage and wisdom. He wants to say that men like Walter Sisulu, when he says Walter Sisulus, he actually wants to tell us that there were many other people like Walter Sisulu, many other people like Oliver Tambo, many other people like Robert Sobukwe, and so on and so forth. And this is the reason why he mentions these names in plural. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. Means perhaps Mandela feels that perhaps people need to suffer so much in order to come out with such great character. A phoenix needs to burn before being reborn again. A caterpillar needs to surround itself in a cocoon before being a butterfly. So in the same way, we need to beat the gold again and again to give it a beautiful shape. So in the same way, he wants to tell us that probably such depths of oppression is required to create such heights of character, such great people. Although Africa is rich in minerals and gems, its greatest wealth is its people who are finer and truer than the purest diamonds. So he believes that it is its people who are the greatest wealth of this country and not those minerals and gems. While talking about courage, Mr. Mandela says that he believes that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's actually the ability to overcome or conquer it. By saying this, he wants to tell us that brave men are also normal people like us, like you, like me. They are also afraid of certain things, but what makes them brave is their habit of not succumbing or giving in to the fear, and trying to get hold of it, trying to get ahead of the fear, trying to overcome the fear. That's what makes them brave, and not the absence of fear. When he talks about love and hate, he tells us that no one is born hating another person based on the color of his skin, his background, or his religion. A child never hates. A child doesn't know how to differentiate between the color of the skin or the religion. So if men can be taught to hate, so a child is taught to hate or child is taught to discriminate later on in his life. So if people can be taught to hate, they can easily be taught to love, as love is a feeling which comes more naturally to human heart than hatred. Love is a feeling that comes that comes before hatred, that comes first. So if men can be taught to hate, why can't men be taught to love? There is an inherent flame of goodness inside man which can be hidden, but it can never be extinguished. And while saying this, Mr. Nelson Mandela gives us an example of some prison guard. He would say that even under direst circumstances, he would sometimes see a glimmer of humanity in some prison guard's eyes, and that would assure him that humanity hasn't been wiped off the entire planet. There's still goodness and humanity in people's heart. They might hide it, but they cannot extinguish it. And this actually gave him a lot of courage to move ahead, to carry on with his struggle, because he knew that there is goodness out there, there is humanity out there. All he needs to do is to try to bring it forth. He talks about twin obligations in a human being's life. He says that every man has twin obligations in his life. One is the obligation to his family, his wife, his parents, his children, and the other is to his people, his community, his country. In a normal society, a man is able to fulfill both the duties, towards his family also and towards his country or community also. But in South Africa, a man of color is never able to fulfill both his duties. A man who tries to live a peaceful family life with dignity, with honor, with respect would certainly be punished and humiliated. A man in South Africa couldn't imagine to live a respectable family life. And a man who would want to serve his country would inevitably be ripped away from his family and home. They would be sent to jail, they would be forced to live apart, in secrecy, running here and there, hiding. So any man who wanted to serve his country, to his people, would not be able to fulfill his duties towards the family. So both the obligations couldn't be fulfilled in South Africa at the same time by a man of color. You could either live with your family or you could either work for your people. Both of them at the same time, both these duties could not be fulfilled by a man of color in South Africa. Such a man would be forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. Twilight is the time after sunset when the darkness hasn't set in, there's still some light in the sky. Twilight existence means to live in secrecy, not coming out in the open or during the daytime for the fear of being detected or caught. So a man who would want to serve his country in South Africa would always be forced to live a twilight existence, means he would be forced to live in secrecy like a rebel. When he talks about his ideas about freedom, he tells us that when he was young, he believed that freedom was running around in the fields, swimming in the clear stream that ran through his village, roasting mealies under the stars, and riding the broad backs of slow-moving bulls. Mealies means maize. So, according to him, this was the freedom when he was young, just doing what he wanted to do, or the regular childhood kids things. When he was a student, he understood that his boyhood freedom had just been an illusion. He came to know that his freedom had already been taken away from him, and that is when he started desiring freedom. As a student, he desired the transitory freedoms. Transitory means temporary, non-permanent, small freedoms like being able to stay out at night, or to read whatever he pleased, or to go wherever he chose. As a young man and lawyer in Johannesburg, he wanted the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving his potential. Achieving his potential means whatever was the inherent potential of Mandela, he wanted to work according to that. Whatever his talents were or qualities were, he wanted to work according to that. He wanted to use his talent, use his potential, and he wanted to progress in his career and in his life. He wanted to earn his keep. Earning someone's keep or earning my keep, earning his keep means to earn enough to support your family, to earn enough to sustain your family or a sufficient amount that you want to earn. And he wanted to marry, have a family, and he wanted the freedom to live a lawful life unobstructed. He did not want any obstruction or probing while living a lawful family life. The African National Congress. So finally, because of all this, he was already so disturbed that he decided to join the African National Congress. When he saw and realized that not only he, but everyone around him who looked like him, who was black or colored, was living under shackles. Shackles means foundation, chains. That's shackles. The hunger for his own freedom became the greater hunger for freedom for everybody. He was hungry for his own freedom. But when he realized that everybody around him is under some sort of chain, some sort of foundation, it became a greater hunger. His desire for freedom became bigger. It now wanted freedom for everybody else, for his entire people. So he joined the African National. The desire for the freedom of his people suddenly animated his life. Animated means filled his life with a lot of action. It drove a law-abiding attorney to become a criminal. Suddenly, from being a lawyer who lived a lawful life, who lived the life according to the laws, within the confines of the law, suddenly he became a criminal in the eyes of the racial government. Although he was not involved in any criminal activity, but demanding the basic and honorable rights for his people made him a criminal in the eyes of the white-only government. Suddenly, a family-loving husband turns into a man without a home, so he was forced to stay apart from his family. He was no more sacrificing or virtuous than the next man. So Mr. Mandela tells us that he was not so sacrificing, he was not so virtuous, he was just like any other man. He wanted to sacrifice only as much as any other man would sacrifice. But he suddenly realized that whatever limited freedom he had, he couldn't enjoy even that when he thought about his people, that they were not free. Whatever limited freedoms he had a job, he had a home, he had a family, he had money, he was earning enough. But he realized that he couldn't enjoy any of it while all the others like him were suffering under this racial government. He decided, or he realized, that freedom is indivisible. You cannot divide up freedom. The chains on any one of his people were the chains on all of them. So if even one person is not free, that means anybody is not free. And when everyone is not free, when everyone is under chains, he also felt himself to be under chains. He associated himself with his people so much that he felt that any foundation on them, any chains or shackles on them, are the chains and shackles on him as well. So if they are not free, he couldn't enjoy his own freedom as well. When he talks about the oppressor and the oppressed, he says that freedom should be compulsory, or freedom is compulsory, necessary, essential for them also who were suppressing others in the past. Suppressing means dominating others in the past. So these people who snatch away others' freedom, they also have the right to freedom. They should also be free, because when they take away others' freedom, they become a prisoner of hatred. Hatred rules their heart. They become a prisoner of hatred. Hatred looms large in front of them, and hence freedom is essential for them also. Freedom from hatred, so that they can see the whole world as it is clearly. The beautiful world, which is shadowed by hatred. The oppressor according to Mr. Mandela, is as much a prisoner as the oppressed. The dominated are already the prisoners, but the one who dominates is also a prisoner of hatred. So the oppressor and the oppressed both have been robbed of their humanity. So when you take away somebody's freedom, your humanity also is taken away from you. You are not human anymore when you try to dominate others. So the oppressor, when he or she tries to dominate someone, their humanity is taken away from them. And that is why freedom is essential for everyone. Freedom from hatred. It's essential for everybody. So the oppressor and the oppressed both should be freed from any kind of hatred, any kind of prejudice, any kind of biased feeling towards others. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, please write in the comment box. And if you want to see some other videos, please let me know. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and do subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.